Hey, good morning, everyone, and thanks, Peter, for sparing some time and joining us for this webinar. So it looks like a beautiful Vancouver morning again. It's sunshine after a little bit of snow, so it looks pretty good time to do this webinar. So, Peter, why don't you? I mean, obviously, you and I go a long time back. We know each other quite well. Why don't you take us through a little bit of your journey? You have worked starting from Dell and then Sophos and yeah, the mobile events and elastic path, very, very different. I mean, all technology sector, but very different types of companies. So, why don't you take us through that? What made you decide about those companies? What worked? What did not work?
Sure.
Etc.
Yeah, well, thank you, Pankaj, and thank you so much for having me on your webinar this morning. It's a real pleasure. Like you said, beautiful Vancouver morning. I was a little worried that the snow would mean ice on the roads this morning, but it actually was nice and wet instead. As a bike commuter, I actually ventured out, which was nice, rather than being worried about the ice. But yeah, beautiful morning in Vancouver. And nice to see spring in the air. And yeah, as far as my career, I mean, look, I'm at Lyft right now as general manager for British Columbia, as well as head of growth markets for the business. And, it has been a fun and convoluted journey to this point. If I look at what I see as a common thread in everything I've tried to do since I, was founding little companies when I was in university and even before that in high school. It's always been trying to focus on how tech can do good and how tech can improve the world. And that's always been, the common thread in what I've tried to gravitate towards. Definitely had some fun attempts at running my own businesses early in my career. I actually came out of my undergraduate engineering degree thinking, I knew I wanted to run a business. And at that point, still do really loved skiing and thought, well, the best optimized, business here would be one where I only have to work half the year so I can ski the other half the year. And of course, naive 21 years old, I took a project that I had worked on for my fourth year engineering studies and tried to build a business around it. It was actually a snowmaking company for ski hills. So I still have my prototype nozzles in the basement up at my house. And after about a year and a half, that was a lot of fun, but really learned a lot about, the realities of running a business. So had some fun early on in my career. I've been in Vancouver tech for probably the last 15 years. I moved here to raise my kids and also just to also get more immersed in the tech sector. I had lived in Ontario, lived in Alberta, came out here to be part of Sophos, which was at that point newly purchased, or Active State had recently purchased Sophos. We had some really ambitious product plans. I ran a product line there, as well as later got into the sales side, got into some corporate development work at Sophos. So that was a lot of fun. But in more recent years, it's been product officer, chief product officer, chief operating officer at a couple of Vancouver-based companies, great Vancouver companies that I helped along the way. There was Quick Mobile, which eventually was purchased by Cvent, and then Elastic Path, which is on a tear as well. Had a lot of fun. And at this point, it's just about bringing technology to the world, focused on doing good with it, and our launch of Lyft in Vancouver was the latest of that. Unfortunately, kind of a tough year to launch, 2020, but we're going strong. We're here for the rebound and having a lot of fun.
Yeah. So let's. So Lyft is. And by the way, I mean, I've used Lyft quite a bit in US when we used to travel. So I find the experience pretty good. Maybe definitely far smoother than your competitors, the like Uber. And so what changed? I mean, these companies like you see, like a little bit like a gig economy, democratization, all those things. Like in last say 10 years or so, you see Lyft, Uber, DoorDash, Skip Dishes, to some extent Airbnb, and all these VRBO, etc. What you really think enabled suddenly this move? And these companies are like Lyft. You guys are, I mean, companies are very, very valuable. And so there must be something which everyone is seeing, which we are not able to see.
Well, I think when technology companies are successful, they really solve a very fundamental either problem or opportunity in the market. We're not solving different problems. We're still solving them with different tools. And I think what you see in companies like whether it's Airbnb or Lyft or others, you're taking a fundamental real world problem and saying, how can we use the tools that we have today in order to solve that problem? Or how can we enhance what we were doing in the past using the new tools available to us? And I think that's really what's making these businesses as valuable as they are, is that we're not building technology for technology's sake. We're building technology that truly solves real world problems. And we're applying a very customer obsessed product management style approach to solving those problems. So really getting into that customer experience and living and breathing what that optimized experience could look like, and then looking at this just plethora of new compute, mobility, cloud tools that we can apply to that problem. So, technology for technology's sake, it's definitely sort of the engineer's dream to build great technology. But I see that when you take a real world problem like solving, transportation, improving people's lives with better transportation, that's where you see the real value in these companies being created.
So tell us a little bit about how do you see Lyft different compared to your previous companies, more in terms of work culture, values, autonomy. So, and I'll give an example. So I have a friend, his daughter, she did BS and MS from Stanford, so she could have gone anywhere in the world, and she's now working for Lyft out of their San Francisco office. And I believe what excited her was about the possibilities and the work culture and really the cool work. I don't know what work she's doing. Obviously, that's confidential, but no, I was surprised by her choice. So there must be something very unique positioning of Lyft that so many talented people like you and her, they work there. Any
Sure.
thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that what differentiates Lyft from some of the other businesses that I've been involved in, and other businesses that are out there, is that we're trying to do something really, really big. And I've pitched to investors about billion-dollar addressable markets, and tried to convince folks that we would take some slice of that and things like that in previous companies that I've been in startups I've helped.
Yeah.
The addressable market for Lyft is a $1.2 trillion addressable market.
Wow.
And the way we look at it, and this is where I think companies with this level of ambition attract people, because what we have is we see our addressable market as essentially the way people get around.
Yeah.
So when you look at the $1.2 trillion consumer transportation market, the vast majority of that is spent on car ownership. And you might find this, some people are kind of taken aback when I talk about Lyft's mission as a business. And it's not about, having drivers take people places or whatever. I mean, that's one manifestation of the service we provide today. But our purpose and our values are around actually redesigning cities around people rather than cars. So if you think over the last 50 years, urban development has really centered around the automobile. But our founders in very early in their careers said, what would it look like if we actually took most of these cars off the road? What would a world look like with less traffic? What would world will look like with less pollution? A world where we need less parking? All these things. And really, Logan and John, who founded Lyft, really came to these conclusions when they were in their college years and were trying to arrange shared rides for people to more efficiently get around. So what if we could narrow our streets and widen sidewalks? What if we could, have pedestrians and bikes and people could get around quickly and safely without a car? So imagine that, and then start chipping away at that problem piece by piece. And rideshare is one piece of that. It's about more efficiently using the vehicle. It's about making sure that instead of a person considering buying a vehicle, which is going to sit idle 96% of its time, take up valuable space at your home in a garage that's, a big part of your lot, as well as in a parking lot at work. What if we could change our mindset about that? So rideshare is one part of it, but Lyft is actually North America's largest bike share operator as well. We have a scooters division. We provide cars for people who put a lot of miles on those cars, helping others get around. So we have a fleet service. So what I love about Lyft and really about our mission is that we are always trying to innovate to solve that bigger problem, and really applying technology and bringing a lot of smart people together to address that bigger addressable market.
Yeah, so as you know, we have decent size operations in India, and obviously Lyft is not there, but there are two players, Uber and a local, not local, I mean, yeah, but local, I think it's owned by SoftBank, Ola.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there are a few, maybe 500,000 to 1 million cars on the street between Uber and Ola. And we move to them. There are other advantages. Also, one is safety. You can, because we have almost 50% women employees, they travel sometime late in the night, etc. It's so much easier to track and governance and all those things, etc. But also in places like India, parking is a big issue, because it's so dense, and a lot of people are moving to public transportation and car on demand.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's definitely changing the way transportation works in those developing countries. So that must also be a pretty decent opportunity for companies like Lyft, yeah? Because as you are responsible for growth markets,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you must be looking at some of these places, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great opportunity for countries who never went through the sort of, interstate era of the US in the 50s and 60s, to actually look at how you can more efficiently get around, how you can share rides, how you can transport people together. Very much we're looking at autonomous as part of our future, and multi-person autonomous. So not necessarily a 3 to 4 seater car, but something that's potentially larger than that. We actually very much partner with transit. We actually feel that transit is a very integral part of the transportation community, and we will supplement transit in many ways. In the Lyft app in Vancouver, you can open the Lyft app and as one of your modes. So we have modes that are in other cities: cycling, scooters, a shared ride when COVID's not here, of course, a personal ride, but also we provide transit directions within the app. And when somebody uses multiple modes to get somewhere and makes it as efficient as possible to get there, that's actually, we see that as a huge win. So we see King George Station in Surrey as one of the main pickup and drop off points for Lyfts in the Metro Vancouver area. It means people are getting to a train station and then taking the train, and then probably walking, or if we had bikes, if we had scooters, taking that from the station. So when people are able to most efficiently and very smoothly and almost without thinking move through sort of their transportation needs, we see that as a massive win.
I saw a very good use case on your website where you are partnering with insurance providers in US, so that a lot of people, they will not go to hospitals for proactive treatment. So where these insurance providers are providing like a free ride for proactive treatment, so that patients can be treated earlier, and obviously they feel better, and the cost is much lesser than them going when they are, it's a more advanced stage of disease. So I'm sure there are a lot of interesting use cases like that. Plus, obviously, COVID, you guys are doing a lot of work in helping patients. Right. So yeah, so a lot of interesting use cases. Yeah.
I think this is a perfect example of where doing the business thing and doing the right thing actually perfectly intersect. So we've partnered with healthcare organizations where doctors were getting quite frustrated that patients weren't showing up for appointments. And so you've got highly paid specialists who are not busy a third of the time because people aren't showing up for appointments. So using our concierge tool, the clinic can call a Lyft for the patient. That person can reliably get to the clinic. Doctors are fully utilized. And patients get the treatment they need. So it's really a win-win-win in so many ways. And as you said, I mean, the pandemic certainly challenged our business. We especially here in Vancouver, where we launched the business on January 24th, 2020. If somebody had told me in advance that 8 weeks later I'd be pretty much shutting the thing down, I would have. I don't know how I would have gotten up that morning on the 24th.
And if my memory serves right, I think your wife is a nurse, yeah. So she have, yeah. So
that's true. So our lives got. My life suddenly like really slowed down, and we were trying to figure out how to keep the business, running and get our drivers earning opportunities. Whereas my wife's work suddenly ramped up. She actually works in the COVID areas in the hospital, so her work just completely accelerated. But yeah, I mean, what was really interesting during that time was we started taking a look at what we wanted to be known for in the community of Vancouver, where we had arrived 7 weeks earlier. And it was that we were here for the community. So we looked at a program called Relief Rides, and we leveraged that to donate ride credit to people who needed to get to the food banks, homeless youth who needed to get to Covenant House. We had, all sorts of programs that we had with Dress for Success and the YWCA and others that we wanted to make sure that this community felt our commitment to it. But we also had people who had just signed up to drive with Lyft. So all these new drivers who, 7 weeks into their new roles are going, all the demand's drying up. What am I going to do? And so we said, look, let's try to keep the drivers as busy as possible and give them that earning opportunity. So the ride credits were provided free to the people who needed them. The drivers still got paid, and we took all any kind of broad brand marketing that we were doing in the city, and we just converted that into community involvement. And really, this is not a time to be kind of coming out with a lot of big flashy branding. It's not a time to be, trying to attract people back into, going out or seeing friends and things like that. We all know that. But when the rebound comes, we want to be ready. We want to be ready with the driver community and definitely start reteaching Vancouver who we truly are and our differentiators.
Yeah. So to the audience, if there are any questions, please feel free to put them on the Q&A window, and we'll continue going. So one question, which is actually, I think I'll bring it a little forward, is obviously Lyft is making a lot of news around driverless cars. So any thoughts? You think it's I mean, obviously that's your stated position in the company. So I mean, I won't say it's a marketing hype or whatever, but you see it happening in next 12 to 24 months, or you think it's still 5 to 10 years away? Or
you know what, I when I started at Lyft, one of the first things I did was actually go down to Las Vegas to visit my colleague down there, and I took my daughter to a concert for a weekend, and we hopped into a driverless Lyft in Las Vegas, where we have been testing autonomous vehicles. We've got a couple of different centers where we've done that, and that car still has 2 safety drivers. It's a car that's learning on behalf of our system how things get navigated out on the road. But we see drivers as a massive opportunity. We see it as an opportunity to enhance vehicle and road safety in a very, very big way. We think that and it's known that about 94% of accidents are preventable, and we have an opportunity to not only create safer roads, but also improve congestion in just the way that vehicles move. So we think that autonomous vehicles will not only improve the safety on our roads and the congestion on our roads, but also utilization of the vehicle. And if you think back to that stat of 96% of their time, our vehicles sit idle. What if that vehicle could be utilized 100% of the time, so that it can keep people moving, possibly get into autonomous vehicles that are slightly different configurations than the standard,
Yeah.
5-seater sedan, and have those cars picking up, dropping off people almost like a micro-mobility bus going through urban centers. So, you reduce that need to park cars, you improve city designs, and we think that effect that autonomous vehicles can have on society in general and on the environment is huge.
And do you see, actually, this came as a question, is do you see like we have dedicated bikes path of no the bike lane? Do you see that happening for automated vehicles? Like you will have a separate lane for them?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that and how city planners will approach that. What I can tell you is that when we put the research into autonomous vehicles, and we know that others are putting a lot of research into autonomous vehicles, they really look at those vehicles being indistinguishable from other vehicles that are on the road. So it's more taking the existing infrastructure, whether that's roads with painted lines, whether that's stop signs, signage, whatever it might be. Those vehicles should be able to recognize that as the same as a human-powered or human-driven car, so that you don't have to necessarily create independent infrastructure for these types of vehicles.
So one thing, in which is this is maybe not specific to Lyft, but more from your experience as a senior person in the technology sector, how you think with all the cloud mobility, a lot of things, gig economy, global outsourcing, whatever, all those things, have they really changed the way we do business in the last 15, 20 years? Has it become easier? Has it become more efficient? Any thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're on an exponential curve of improved tooling to solve problems, whether that's problems for enterprise, whether that's problems and opportunities for consumers. When I think of the role I played at Sophos, which was almost 15 years ago, I was brought in to launch a new hardware appliance. And this was a 1U rackable, device that did some email filtering. We then launched web filtering and network protection. But the early iterations of those were all hardware-based devices. We contracted with contract manufacturers. When I think, 17 years ago, I was part of a very interesting company called Yada Yada for a year, or about 2.5 years. And Yada Yada aimed to change the world's how the world stores data with distributed redundant systems, and again, it was a hardware-based solution where you had to buy refrigerator-sized cabinets of RAID and controllers from us. When I look at how that has that activation cost of starting a business, being able to get on-demand cloud services, and that just brings the barrier to innovation down. I kind of see three things. I think one of them is the influence of mobility, and just mobility and edge devices in general, with either compute power on board or more of a passive device, whether that's an IoT device, a sensor, something like that. Just this proliferation of edge devices is huge, and then it's the communication infrastructure for communicating between those devices, and then it's just the horsepower and the computing utility that the cloud providers now provide. We wouldn't be able to do something like autonomous vehicles at scale without 5G communications infrastructure. those cars have myriads of sensors that are all communicating and try to replicate the human brain or several human brains with respect to how well that thing is sensing and thinking and predicting and all that. That all needs to communicate. So when you take those edge devices, that IoT, and the compute power on board those devices, then the communication infrastructure, and then the cloud computing power, all of that's rising exponentially, which just makes the barriers to innovation come down.
So, and I know, I mean, obviously, I need to be respectful of that. Lyft is a public company, so a lot of things you may not like to share. But do you have any examples where really the data is helping basically Lyft or any other company make better decisions? It may be as simple as say Google Maps or
Sure.
city data, because there's a lot of now public data available, like governments are sharing its more and more data, and you have APIs, you can connect, etc. Any good examples there?
For sure, for sure, and clearly, data is a huge part of our business. We have data scientist teams, we have analytics teams that they're constantly looking to optimize things. It comes down to what I mentioned earliest, which is solve real world problems. And if you can solve real world problems with data, then you're using it for delighting customers. You're using it for creating an environment that's as safe as possible. You're using it for look, if I had told you 10 years ago that you'd be able to pull out a phone and a car would come up and take you where you want, drop you off, and you wouldn't even need to pay with cash and all that. There's a certain magic that Vancouverites have only discovered in the last year, but the rest of the world kind of discovered about 7-8 years ago. It's really that magic. It's making that magic work with the level of simplicity, with the level of personalization, the level of just perfect experience. And I think that people's expectations are constantly being re-leveled to these higher and higher levels. Generations are growing up without ever having to think about how they're going to get somewhere, because there's going to be an on-demand transportation as a service app that's going to be able to provide them how to get there. In the past, it was I started driving a vehicle, and I first had to worry about whether there were 2 or 3 gas stations where I had to fuel up. Now I don't have to worry about that. Lots of gas stations. I'm slowly going to convert to electric over time, but I don't have to worry. There are things you just don't need to worry about, and it's the data that provides that magic. So when I think of really practical examples that Lyft uses data for, something like a big event. So harken back with me to the days when we actually had like hockey games and concerts and things like that. But and we will very much again. Imagine 60,000 people leaving a venue, and half of those calling rideshare, and us wanting to provide ETAs of less than 5 minutes. That's a data problem.
Sure.
That is a data problem. That's personalizing a driver activation to a certain region, and making sure that customer service is just second to none. We look a lot at patterns of how people, use cases, right? Use cases as to how people use the product. And again, coming back to good product management, applied to technology, but solving real world problems. And we try to make sure that our drivers are informed as to where they can maximize their earnings. So determining the busiest times of day, showing that to people in the app so they can go there, making sure the ETAs and the accuracy of that information going to both the driver and the rider, really meshes, so that it just becomes that sort of magic. And recently we're always enhancing the safety of our product. And I would say that recently we added something that with a partnership with ADT, where a driver or a rider ever feels unsafe or uncomfortable in the ride, they can contact ADT security very, very silently. Without speaking, without even tapping on their phone too much. It's a very subtle way of saying, I need some help. And then, of course, that gets escalated with the data. We know, who's traveling where and things like that, and we're able to help. So it's about creating that magic that just resets the level of expectations. And I think that's where the real power in data comes in.
No, that's good insight. And so so you have been with Lyft for quite some time. So how do you, anything which you can publicly share in terms of some 2 or 3 good work practices, which really you see it very different from other, say, Vancouver companies or anyway, I mean, like, no, one example we had given, I hope I can share that. No, you guys block certain part of the week where no, there are no external meetings, etc.
Sure.
No, so those type of thing, yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Don't try to meet with me on a Tuesday before 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
That's look. One thing that's really interesting for me is that I've worked for some international companies like Sophos that was based in the UK. I've worked for mid-sized, smaller Vancouver companies, a couple of hundred people. Lyft is 4,000 or 5,000 people, Silicon Valley based. I think that one thing that really impresses on me across all these businesses is that people are actually more similar than we think we are. I wouldn't say that we know all the answers as a Silicon Valley company, and I think that there are Vancouver-based companies based in small centers across the US and Canada, all over the world that have incredible practices, and we're constantly learning from them. And we hope that we can also, share some of these practices. I mean, Tuesday morning, no meetings. It's a DNS block, do not schedule block in people's calendars. I think that's a really great practice. It allows people just that time to focus on work. One of the things that's wonderful about Lyft is that we are incredibly cross-functional and operate very cross-functionally with a very flat structure. So you end up working with a lot of different teams, but that means a lot of meetings. And since we're not all geographically located, it's not as easy to drop by, chat by the water cooler or whatever, and move on. So especially in kind of COVID times right now, having to schedule either 15 or 20 or half an hour meetings really fills up your schedule a lot. So people are being really tight on not scheduling Tuesdays and trying to save some time to actually get some work done. I would say that the things that come with a business like Lyft, and I would say that this is just the nature of our scale, is that there are programs and practices that smaller businesses just don't have the critical mass to get to. And I would say that things like our level of operating procedures around driver service, around fleet management, around things like that, we're really operating at a big company level. We have very professional teams who've come in from Tesla, who've come in from large manufacturers and other places who really know how things can be done at scale. And I would say that peeking into that world and then being able to sit on whether it's advisory boards or whatever for smaller companies allows that knowledge transfer. So I'd say the only real way we're different is that we're bigger and we have some of these things at scale. And to just touch on one point, I think one of the things that's actually really impressive at Lyft specifically, and I can't speak to other big companies this size, but just the level of sort of employee support and the level of inclusion discussions, the level of employee net promoter, the level of feedback in the system, the level of kind of calibrations across teams and things like that. You really only get those things at scale, and I think they're incredibly positive to creating a high performing culture.
And I think to some extent you answered this question, which came that how culture is helping drive innovation at Lyft. Anything you would like to add there? I mean, you did cover it a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you look at culture, what's interesting is coming from a product background, coming from a product management and engineering background, you think, okay, well, that's got to be the heart of a technology company, right? It's the engineers, it's the tech that's going to solve the issues. What's really fascinating is that when you have a mission that you're just obsessed about pursuing, you end up attracting people from so many different walks of life that come with a different perspective. And so, sure, we've got an amazing engineering team. We have an amazing product leadership team, but we also have an amazing compliance team and legal team. We have, operations teams who come from some of the world's largest companies. We have a number of our revenue operations folks and planning folks come from Google. So we've got a number of people who really came with attracted by the vision, not by the fact that it's a tech company. We're solving a big problem. We're solving, improving people's lives through transportation, and I think that's where that's where you attract so many people from so many different walks of life, and that's what creates the culture. We have incredibly high employee engagement, and it's because our founders are very real people who want to solve a really big problem.
So, what are the top 2 or 3 business metrics for Lyft? And I'm assuming this again I'm sure you must be publishing it also as part of a public company. So, yeah, what keeps you guys, driven?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, we look at bookings very, very tightly. We're always looking at our revenue, and we measure revenue per active driver. So per active rider. So we're very interested in our churn metrics on, how we acquire riders to be loyal to Lyft, how we keep those riders loyal. And then we watch those if there is churn, why. So it's about active riders, and it's about the revenue that we are able to associate with those active riders. So that leads to things like, how do we incent greater loyalty? How do we reward the loyal riders? I think we obsess over customer metrics. The quality of the drivers that drive with Lyft, the quality of the riders, the experience that they have are really, really important to us. And making sure that we've got the right product mix for them. So it's that sort of customer obsessed culture. Over the last year here, clearly it's been a tough one for the business. Our rides dropped very, very sharply in March and April last year. And we've been very, very focused on profitability. So you'll hear our CFO talk about how profitability for the business is within our sights this fiscal or calendar year. And I think that has been a business metric that we've been really, really focused on. Pre-pandemic, we IPO'd, I think, a year or so before the pandemic. And it was more of a growth time. Us, others in the industry also were just growing with our ambitions to grow as much as possible. And I think that balancing growth with profitability is something that the pandemic forced on us. But what it does is it positions us incredibly, incredibly well for both organic growth and margin expansion as the recovery takes hold. So really positioning well on a revenue per active rider basis for the future.
So I'm curious on one question, and as a business owner, are customers and drivers, who are 2 big stakeholders in your business, are they sticky to a particular brand, or they just pick whatever is the gives them the best money, returns, convenience, whatever? Yeah.
Right. Well, that's a great question, and I think a great question that a lot of consumer brands try to address. As a do you shop at Save-On, or do you sometimes go to IGA? What attracts you to that brand and keeps you at that brand? all of our drivers are independent contractors. So that's a really, really important thing that is sort of a very fundamental part of the business that we enable. Every one of those drivers is an independent business person. We don't provide them with tools. We provide them with a platform to use, but they provide their own vehicles and they provide their own tools to the job. What that does is gives them ultimate flexibility. And so we're not only always trying to win over the rider with our brand promise, our pricing, our commitment to communities, our differentiators that we feel we bring to a rider, but we are constantly always trying to win over those drivers as well. And actually, nowhere is that more acute than in British Columbia, where our ability to onboard drivers is actually one of the most difficult in North America. We have a licensing system here or a regulation that requires a commercial driver's license for Lyft drivers. No other region in North America has that we operate in, and that makes our driver supply a lot tighter than in other regions where that flexible learning opportunity is open to anyone with a regular license. So we've been very much focused on attracting drivers and making sure that they feel very comfortable with the brand, of course, getting them the earning opportunities they need, and giving them the service they need. And then on the other side, creating that demand within the community so that when you pick up that phone, the first app that you tap is the pink one.
And since you are here, so one question which is not related to Lyft, but I'm curious for everyone's benefit is, so you have worked with many technology companies, some successful, some super successful, some not so successful. So what are the 2 or 3 things which you think is important in what made a company super successful and what made a company fail? And needless to say, you may say founders themselves, yeah, but I'm happy to take that one, but yeah. Sometime they can be the worst enemy of the company. Yeah.
Look, what's the more businesses you see, the more you see that every business is very unique and has its own strengths. I would say for me it comes down to probably 4 things. One, I would say solve a real world problem. Second, I would say, and I said this before, customer obsessed. Third, mission driven, really, really focused on the mission. And then it's about leveraging the technology and things around you. And, I'm happy to provide a few examples for each of those points. But, I was reading yesterday that my friend Laurie's company, Galvanize, sold to a company called Diligent yesterday for, it's rumored to be $1 billion. No, that's not a confirmed figure out there, but Galvanize, which grew up as ACL in Vancouver, it has an incredibly bright future associated with it. People think, okay, what do they do? Like, what does ACL and Galvanize do? And it's audit and tax and compliance software and things like that. But they solve problems like busting drug cartels that are committing fraud. They catch doctors who are falsely diagnosing cancer patients. They help tax authorities, collect and mitigate against money laundering. I mean, really real world problems, and I think that those are the types of things that really resonate when you see a very true successful technology company. If it's a problem that's difficult to solve, I think that's number one. For me, number 2 is that customer obsession. I've been a product guy most of my career, and I have always dove right into living and breathing the customer experience. To the point where not last night, but the night before, I went out and drove for 4 hours as a Lyft driver because we have just introduced a new vehicle to the Lyft driver community in Vancouver. It's a hydrogen-powered Toyota Mirai that Toyota has made available to Lyft drivers. And I wanted to take one of these cars out. I wanted to see what people said about it. It doesn't have a middle seat in the back. I wanted to see how people reacted, and I wanted to see that for myself. So, you know, wherever you are in the organization, be customer obsessed. And you know, sometimes you have to dig around and figure out exactly who that customer is. I wanted to live, you know, the driver experience through the driver's perspective, but I also wanted to hear the customer feedback. And sure, in a big company of 6,000 people, you have, you know, customer councils and you know, hundreds of reports that are created about, you know, what we really, how the community sees us and stuff like that. But there's nothing like getting getting behind the seat of a car and just driving for a few hours and seeing that, so that you can speak with authority, at least anecdotal authority. Yeah. And then of course, you know, the numbers are the numbers, because you know, are only a sample of one. But I think that being customer obsessed, and I think for a lot of enterprise companies, you know, Lyft is a consumer brand, but for a lot of enterprise companies, that's really looking at all the different customers that are in your chain. So it's your end user, it's your economic buyer, it's your channel partner. Put yourself in each of those people's shoes to make sure that you're just knocking it out of the park for each of them. So that's the customer obsession piece. And then I think it's around, you know, we've talked about mission driven, and we've talked about leveraging technology. The other thing that's I'll say, you know, talking about leveraging technology, of course, never try to reinvent the wheel. If somebody's done something well, grab it and go and run with it, and don't, you know, focus on where your true differentiator is, rather than trying to build, you know, rebuild something that's already commodity. But the other thing that I would say, and this is something that I've really seen within Lyft, is don't settle for second-rate talent. If you look across the board, A players will hire other A players because they know that that is what they need to succeed, is great people around them, and they're not, and they're self-aware enough to know that I need people who are as good or better than me to help this community. If you hire B players, they're going to hire C players, because they will always be nervous about the fact that they're not an A player, and so they'll want to hire people who are not as great as them. So don't settle for second-rate talent. And I would say that if that's one thing that I've really seen in Silicon Valley companies, is absolutely no room for second-rate talent. It's a very, very amazing, high-performing work environment.
Yeah, and I know we are out of time, but just to add 30 seconds on Galvanize, it's also a very good example of how not the founder, but the primary shareholder, or I think he was 100% owner basically. And I think his dad, who was a UBC prof, who had started the company, but then the founder realized that I need to bring someone to run the company, and he brought Laurie in and had a pretty good process. I spent some time with him on how he let it go and brought a very capable chair in Eric Patel. And really, sometime for companies' growth, those steps are necessary, and how you let it go and build a world-class company. It's a very good example of, and they are in the next building actually, where I think phenomenal company, and how it evolved in last definitely 20, 30 years.
Perfect example of A players hiring A players.
Yeah. Good. Thanks a lot, Peter. Any other comment you would like to add? Otherwise, it has been a great learning, great session, very inspiring.
Well, thank you for having me, Pankaj. This has been a lot of fun. Always enjoy talking about Lyft, talking about technology, sitting chatting with you. It's always a pleasure. Really appreciate this. Thanks for everyone who tuned in. And I can't wait to start doing these in person back at the Hyatt, where we used to have some of the best breakfasts.
Thank you. Yeah.
Definitely got me out for your talks, and love the panel discussions. The networking groups are always great. So
Peter, you have been a great support throughout. So thanks a lot for your time again, and have a great day. And thank you, everyone. Thanks for attending.
Thanks, everyone.